Edelia the Cornflower Girl. Prologue. High up on the sharp peaks of the mountains, where only eagles dare to fly and where the clouds cast their silent shadows over the deep precipices, lived a cornflower. She was no ordinary flower. Born from the morning dew and blessed by the moonlight, she grew alone, hidden from the eyes of the world, with her roots deep in the cold stone and her dreams clinging to the sky. Her name was Edelia, a name unspoken by anyone, but proudly born in the silence of the mountain. Day after day, the wind sang her old songs and the stars watched over her. But her vegetable heart, unseen and unheard, yearned for something else. A deep desire made her tremble on the clear nights, to be able to walk, to speak, to feel, to be human, to descend into the world below, where rivers laugh, children play and people share their love and pain. For years, Edelia dreamed with her eyes towards the horizon. But who would have thought that one day, the steps of an old woman, with eyes like chamomile and the smell of jasmine, would approach her rock. There was the Fairy Floraea, the goddess of flowers, a being as old as the earth, but full of gentleness. She could speak to all plants and felt, in that cornflower, a different kind of life. Then in the breeze, Edelia raised her prayer. Not for immortality, but for life. For feeling.To know the world with all its beauty and weight. And the fairy listened. This is the story of a flower that dared to dream further than the horizon. The story of a fragile heart, born from the mountain, that descended into the world not to get lost, but to bloom differently. Chapter 1. Desire. The sharp wind blew gently over the steep cliff, bringing with it the cold smell of eternal snow and the unheard rustle of time that flows differently on the mountain peaks. On a white cliff, grown between hard and cold stones, a cornflower lived its life. It was not just any flower, it was Edelia, the flower that had dreamed. Her delicate velvety body had witnessed countless sunrises. She had seen the birds flying below her, heard the thunder rolling over the rocks, felt the touch of the first winter snowflake and the rare warmth of the summer sun. But she had experienced all this in a deep silence, in an eternal immobility. She could not leave, she could not cry, she could not caress. The earth held her bound, as if life itself had given birth to her to contemplate without touching. And deep in her vegetal being, a spark of desire had been born. 𝕮𝖎𝖗𝖗. First it was a curiosity. What is happening beyond the clouds, beyond the rocks? Then it grew, becoming a question. What is that human life? And finally, the desire rose like a silent prayer to the sky. I want to be alive, like them. The day Floraea answered the call was the most important of her existence. The goddess of flowers, born from the essence of the green world, came floating, with footsteps without traces and eyes of light. When she saw her, Edelia trembled. Not from the wind, but from a new, unknown emotion, hope. The goddess approached and understood, without words, what was burning in the unknown heart of the flower. Tell me, Edelia, what do you want? Floraea asked, in a voice that was not heard with the ears, but felt in the heart, like a forgotten melody. The petals moved gently, like a breeze. I want life. I want to be human, to feel the wind with my skin, to see the world with real eyes, to be able to walk, to be able to speak, to be able to love, to live, even if it hurts. The goddess remained silent for a moment. She looked with sadness and wisdom at the flower. She had witnessed, in her millennia of existence, naive desires, vain requests, souls that did not know what they were asking for. But Edelia was different. She did not ask to get rid of something. She did not ask out of vanity. Her desire was pure, clean as a dewdrop. And that is precisely why she was dangerous. Edelia, what you ask for is a double-edged gift. To be human means to have a soul. And the soul, even if it is the source of love, is also the gate of pain. People love, but also betray. They hope, but also lose. They forgive, but also hurt. Will you be able to bear all this? The flower fell silent. But from her silence there was a conviction stronger than any words. I have stood still all my life, with my roots clinging to the stone. I have heard the laughter of hikers and the songs of birds. I have seen how the clouds change their shape and how the sun leaves and returns. I have felt everything, but I have lived nothing. If life means crying, laughing, feeling, I want to know everything. I want to be alive. Floraea bowed her head. A flower that asked for human life had never happened before. It was against the law of nature, against the natural order. But maybe, sometimes, the love for life is itself a law. And maybe, In this love, a greater power is hidden than in magic. If I transform you, you will no longer be a flower. You will no longer be able to feel the roots in the earth, nor the wind through the petals. You will be flesh and blood. You will feel hunger, cold, longing. And you will not be able to turn back. I know, Edelia answered. But that is how it must be. Because a life lived in the unknown hurts more than any wound. The goddess approached, soft light emerged from her hands, like a dawn breeze, and in that light, all the flowers in the world told their stories. Tea was the essence of creation, the primordial seed of life, which only Floraea could touch. Then, I will give you what you ask for. I will give you a human body, eyes with which to see the world, a heart with which to feel, a voice with which to speak. But I will also leave you a memory. The scent of the cornflower will stay with you. And whoever meets you will know that you are different. The sky darkens for a moment, and the mountain trembles. An unexpected warm breeze rises from the stone. Around the flower, the air began to pulse. The petals shook slowly, turning into hair. The stem bent and stretched out, becoming a body. A beat was heard, the heart. Then another. And another. When the light dissipated, in the place of the flower stood a girl. She was fragile and beautiful, with silver hair, eyes clear as the sky and a shy smile. Her feet touched the ground for the first time. Her hands moved undecided. But in her eyes there was a special light, the light of beginning, of wonder, of fulfilled desire. Your name is still Edelia, the goddess told her. Your name will not change, because what you are must not be forgotten. The girl closed her eyes and inhaled. For the first time, she felt the air. She felt the cold that shivered her skin. She felt the weight of her own body. And a tear. Not of pain, but of amazement. Thank you, Floraea, she whispered. The goddess smiled, but the smile was melancholic. She knew what awaited the girl. But she also knew that this choice had been made with her heart. Go now, child. The world awaits you. You will love. You will fall. You will grow. You will suffer and laugh. This is human life. A treasure paid for dearly. With one last glance, Floraea turned and disappeared into the wind, into the leaves, into the scents, leaving Edelia alone. But she was no longer a flower. She was a being. Edelia walked slowly, discovering every gesture. Every stone under her feet was a revelation. Every sound, a mystery. The world, finally, was opening up to her. And so, the impossible wish had come true. But the real adventure was just beginning. Chapter 2. First Steps. The dawn of a new day was spilling over the mountain ridges like a canvas of pale light, painting the rocks in shades of gold and silver. To the world, it was a morning like any other. To Edelia, it was her first morning. The first time she had felt the chill of morning, not like a breeze caressing petals, but like a living touch on bare skin. The first time her feet had rested on the ground, trembling slightly, fragile and curious. Edelia stood on the top of the rock that had once been her cradle, where once her roots had sunk deep into the stone. Now her heart throbbed. Her blue gaze, deep as the winter sky, stretched out over the green forests, the shadowed valleys, the rivers that sparkled in the distance. Everything was new. Every tree, every stone, every cloud seemed to call to her with an unspoken promise. And yet, amidst this grand landscape, she felt small. So, this is what it's like to be alive, she whispered to herself. Her voice sounded weak, strange, like a language she knew instinctively, but had never spoken. It was heard for the first time. She liked the sound. It was warm, fragile, real. She took a step. Her knees trembled. Her bare feet encountered sharp, cold stones, but it didn't hurt. The pain was a part of her new existence, and she welcomed it with amazement, not fear. She staggered, fell to her knees, but laughed. It was her first fall. She rose slowly, her hands supporting herself on the rock, and took another step. Then another. Walking was an act of will. Each step was a choice, a gesture in which she said to herself, I exist. The climb was hard, but the descent was an adventure. As high as the mountain that had held her captive had been, so wide was the unknown who was waiting for her below. She looked at the horizon and felt for the first time the taste of fear. It was a deep, unknown thrill, but also a calling. On her way, Edelia discovered the wind, not the one that rustled through the petals, but the wind that penetrated through the hair, that whipped her cheeks and ripped the tears from her eyes. She was cold, but she was also happy. Everything was a revelation. A white butterfly flew past her. Without thinking, she reached out her hand. The butterfly stopped on her finger, as if it recognized her. Edelia smiled, and her heart filled with such pure joy that she felt it could melt. "You are free too. But you have wings," she whispered. She had legs. But maybe, in a way, walking was a form of flight. Descending among the rocks, she approached the edge of a forest. The sun barely penetrated through the dense branches. The air was humid, smelling of moss, earth and life. A bird was singing somewhere in the foliage, and Edelia stopped, spellbound. That sound, the song, was more beautiful than any silence she had known in her life as a flower. She bent down and touched the trunk of a tree. The bark was rough, cold but alive. She felt the connection with the forest, that ancient, deep knowledge, left in her from her life as a flower. She knew instinctively which plants were good, which hid poison, which trees had warm wood and which kept the shadows of the cold. But now everything was seen through the eyes of a man. And it was overwhelming. A deer jumped out of a bush. For a moment, their eyes met. Edelia felt a vibration, a silent recognition. Nature still saw her as one of its own, even though her body had been changed. The deer looked at her with gentle eyes, then jumped into the depths of the forest. "I am not yet one of the people, and yet, I am not even a flower anymore," she said in a low voice. The night began to fall. The sky turned purple, then dark blue, and finally black. The stars rose one by one, like thoughts. Edelia had no clothes, no fire, no shelter. But she did not complain. She gathered leaves, made a bed for herself next to a thick fir trunk, and curled up, shivering. That night she learned what true cold is. Human loneliness, the darkness that does not bring peace, but unrest. But that same night she learned something even more important, the courage to stay. She woke up at dawn, enveloped in fog. Drops of dew had settled on her body. She was cold in her bones, but in her soul, a new will, like a spark that did not want to go out. Edelia got up and stepped forward. This time, without hesitation, and on the way, she discovered that hunger is not just a word. Her insides were growling, and each step became harder. She found some berries. She recognized blackcurrants and rose hips. She ate them with gusto, even though the taste was sour. She learned to feed herself. She learned to drink water from a clear spring. She learned to wash herself, to be surprised, to laugh when a squirrel climbed onto her shoulder thinking it was a branch. Every day, she learned a new language of life. After a few days, she reached the edge of the forest, and in the distance, roofs could be seen, the first houses. Smoke rose to the sky. Dogs barked. Children laughed. Edelia stopped, and her heart beat faster. She had waited for her a lifetime. She had dreamed of them. But now, fear returned. How would they react? Would they accept her? Will they understand her? But she knew what she had to do. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped into the world. Her world. The one she had been born for a second time. Chapter 3. The village between the hills. The sun had risen above the forest, caressing with gentle rays the gentle hills that stretched beyond the edge of the forest. Edelia stood hidden among the leaves of a thicket, looking in amazement at the world she had dreamed of all her life. A village of people, simple and peaceful, nestled between green hills, with wooden houses and shingle roofs, with fountains, gardens and paths trodden by footsteps. The smoke that rose lazily from the chimneys mixed with the scent of summer flowers and baked bread, and in the distance, the bells of a small church rang softly, calling people to a new day. Edelia had never seen houses, gates or fields before. Everything was new and alive. A rooster crowed somewhere, and a woman had gone out with a bucket in her hand to the fountain. Children ran down the street, playing with a puppy that barked happily. This world had life in movement, in sound, in gestures, a life she had never known in the silence of the mountains. But with the more she looked, the more she felt the need to belong. She turned to the stream that flowed nearby, and with her clumsy hands, she made a dress for herself from large burdock leaves and knotted grass. She seemed like a creature out of a fairy tale, beautiful, wild, alien to the world. Her silver hair flowed over her shoulders, and her eyes, large and clear, reflected the summer sky. She looked into the water. A young woman with a clean and delicate face was looking back at her. For the first time, Edelia understood what it meant to have a face, to be able to smile, to be able to cry. With her heart pounding in her chest like a bird trapped in a cage of longing and fear, she walked towards the village. The first people she met were children. They were playing with a ball on the road and they saw her coming from the forest. They stopped suddenly, looking at her with wide eyes. "Who are you?" asked a boy with red hair and freckles. Edelia hesitated. She didn't know exactly what to answer. How could she say that it had been a flower? "My name is Edelia. Where do you come from?" "From there," she said, pointing to the dense forest. "From the mountain." The children looked at her curiously, but without malice. She didn't seem dangerous, just different. "Why do you have a dress made of leaves?" asked a little girl with pigtails. Edelia smiled. "Because I have nothing else, that's how I was raised by the forest." An older boy, who had come in the meantime, laughed softly, but not mockingly. "Are you a magical being?" "Maybe," she said, "or maybe just someone who wanted to see the world." An old man who was passing by with a wheelbarrow stopped. Looking at the scene, he scanned her with his eyes, then approached. "This girl is not from the village. I have never seen her before. What is your name, child?" "Edelia," she said again, in a gentle voice. "And where do you come from?" "From the mountain. I lived there. But now, I have come to learn what life means." The old man nodded slowly, with silent wisdom. He felt that this girl was different. She did not smell of dust, but of dew. She did not seem hungry for food, but for meaning. "Come with me, child," he said. "I can't let you sleep in the forest. You are human, and people shouldn't be left alone." Edelia followed him without hesitation. She walked alongside him on the dusty street, watching his sure steps, worn by time. People came out of the yards, looked at her, some made the cross, others just raised their eyebrows. The rumor of a girl coming out of the forest spread quickly. The old man took her to a simple house, with wooden walls and a porch shaded by vines. A woman with warm eyes and hard-working hands stepped out on the threshold. "Grandpa, who is the girl?" "A child from the mountains. She has nothing, but she has a clean look. Give her a coat, give her some soup." The woman didn't ask questions. Her face showed wonder but also kindness. She welcomed Edelia as if she were a lost relative. She gave her an old but clean dress, a hairbrush, a bowl of warm water. Edelia had never felt such care before. It was a different kind of touch, the touch of humanity. After eating a hot vegetable soup, her heart calmed down. She was no longer just a hungry body or a curious mind. She was, for the first time, part of something. That day the people in the village looked at her, talked about her, asked themselves, "Who is the girl with eyes like the sky and hair like the moon?" Some considered her a lost orphan. Others, a magical creature. Some feared her. Others admired her. Edelia could not explain the truth. "How can you say that you were a flower?" But she felt that in time, through simple gestures and kindness, the world would know her for who she was. That night, she slept for the first time in a bed. Not on stone, not in leaves, but in soft cloth, under a thick blanket. Through the window, she saw the stars. She knew them. She had watched them for thousands of nights. But now they were hers, for her and the dream. Floraea appeared for a moment, surrounded by flowers and light. "How is it, Edelia?" "It's beautiful. It's hard. But that's life." The fairy smiled. "It's just the beginning." The next day, Edelia woke up with a smile on her face. She would begin to learn to help to understand people, to discover not only the world, but also herself. And the village between the hills would be her first home. Chapter 4. In the Hearts of People. The days flowed slowly in the village between the hills, like the stream that silently flowed through 𝕮𝖊𝖃. That simple but meaningful world, Edelia was beginning to take root, not in the ground, as before, but in the hearts of people. From the first morning spent under the roof of old 𝕮𝖊𝖃 and his daughter 𝕮𝖃, her life had changed little by little. Each day brought a lesson, a test, a gift. 𝕮𝖃 had shown her how to knead bread dough, a job that seemed hard for Edelia's delicate hands, but which she had learned with patience. He had made her laugh when, at first, he had put too much salt and the bread had turned out bitter. But old 𝕮𝖃 had eaten it anyway, saying, "Better bitter and made with heart, than sweet and hypocritical." That was how Edelia had begun to feel. Not everything had to be perfect. People did not live like flowers, in silence and immutable beauty. They made mistakes, they demanded forgiveness, they laughed, cried and moved on. Every morning, she helped with the housework, collected the eggs from the nest, watered the garden, carried water from the well. It was work, but also joy. She felt a special satisfaction when she saw tomatoes growing in the garden that she had watered, or when she heard the puppies barking with joy when she brought them leftover food. But what touched her the most was the presence of people. Each one had a story. Each one carried with them a wound and a hope. One afternoon, Edelia sat on the porch of the house and looked out into the distance. A little girl from the neighbors, Mara, came to her. She was silent, with big and sad eyes. "What happened to you, Mara?" Edelia asked gently. The little girl did not answer immediately. She was playing with the hem of her dress, pulling on the white thread. "My cat died." Edelia felt a shiver. She didn't know exactly what death meant to humans. In the plant world, everything was transformed. Death was not an end, but a cycle. But here, it seemed different. "Did you love her? She was the only one who always waited for me when I came home from school. And now, she doesn't come anymore." Edelia didn't know what to say. She thought, then took Mara in her arms and whispered, "Maybe she's a star now, or maybe a white flower, somewhere in the forest. But love doesn't die, she stays in your heart." Mara cried, but smiled through her tears. And in that smile, Edelia understood. The human soul could feel things that no root could ever understand. In the days that followed, she began to be more and more present in the life of the village. People, at first curious, then cautious, began to accept her. She went to church on Sundays, stood with the women in line at the well, gathered herbs for medicines and picked flowers from the meadows. She had a secret gift. Her touch seemed to heal. A boy with a scratch. The wound on his hand had been touched gently by Edelia, and the wound closed as if by magic. A woman who had not slept for whole nights said that after Edelia brought her St. John's wort tea and sang softly to her, she fell asleep like a baby. People began to call her the girl with the flower soul. But not everyone looked at her kindly. One day, as Edelia made her way to the small market. In the center of the village, an old woman, with sharp eyes and a sharp tongue, stopped in front of her. "You are not one of us," she said. "You came from the forest, but what are you doing among people? You don't smell like sweat, but like herbs. You weren't born from a mother, but from uncleanness." Edelia remained motionless. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't yet learned to respond to evil with wisdom. But before tears could fill her eyes, another woman, 𝕰𝖊𝖑𝖎, came and put her hand on her shoulder. "And if it's not ours, what? It brings light, not evil. And the village is dark enough sometimes to chase away those who illuminate." The people around murmured. Some defended her, others were silent. Edelia felt the taste of judgment for the first time. She had been loved, but now she saw that people could also reject. Here she began to understand the truth told by Floraea. People are not only light, but also shadow. That night, she cried for the first time. Not from physical pain, but from a deep sadness, that of not being understood, of being seen as something foreign. But the next morning, on the doorstep of the house, she found a wreath of wildflowers and a note written in a clumsy hand. "You are good. Don't change." It was signed, Mara. Her heart was filled with light. That was life among people, full of contradictions. They loved and hated, accepted and cast out. But somewhere at their core, there was kindness, courage and hope. And Edelia wanted to learn to touch them, to cultivate them, like a gardener planting seeds in new soil. That day, she returned to the square. She raised her head, smiled at those who looked at her in wonder, and said, "I didn't come to take anything, I came to give. That's what I learned from the mountains. Whoever has life, must give it away." And from that moment, Edelia was no longer just a girl in a dress of leaves. She was one of them. Chapter 5. Secrets and Whispers. Life in the village seemed to flow in a calm silence, like a river winding through the hills without haste. But that silence was deceptive. Beneath the surface of ordinary days, Edelia began to feel unseen vibrations, unspoken words, sidelong glances, gestures that seemed innocent, but carried weight. One evening, as the sunset light covered the village in a golden hue, Edelia was walking alone on the path behind the gardens. She loved that place, a secluded corner, where the acacias leaned over the road and the wild flowers grew carefree. She sat on a fallen log and listened to the birds singing. Then she heard whispers. They came from behind the fence of an old house. There were two voices. She didn't recognize them, but the tone was hurried, hidden, weighed down with fear. Did you see what that girl did? How she laid hands on that boy and miraculously healed. It's not natural. She's not even from the village. She just appeared like that, out of nowhere. I say she's a witch. Did you see the way she looks? It's as if she could read your thoughts. Edelia froze. She got off the log and, without waiting for the continuation, hurriedly set off on the way back home. For the first time, she felt like she didn't really belong. She had been welcomed, yes. Fed, clothed, tolerated. But loved? Understood. Maybe only by a few. That night, she couldn't sleep. She thought about the words Floraea had said the day she had given birth to her. Some people love with their souls, but others are afraid. And out of fear, they give birth to hatred. The next day, when she went to the well with 𝕰𝖉𝖊𝖑𝖎, the women around her fell silent when they saw her. Even the children's laughter seemed more restrained. I look at you differently, 𝕰𝖉𝖊𝖑𝖎 whispered to her, in a low voice. Be careful, Edelia. People quickly forget the good and remember the fear. But not everyone had changed. Mara, her little friend, came to her every day and brought her flowers picked from the forest. And old 𝕮𝖊𝖊𝖑 looked at her like a granddaughter he never had. Don't change, child, he told her one evening, when the stars were rising over the rooftops. When a person changes what they are to please others, they are lost. You are special. Maybe the world needs that. And the following days, Edelia began to notice other things. Old 𝕮𝖊𝖑, who had judged her so harshly in the market, talked to herself at night. Once, Edelia saw her carrying something into the forest, a small box, wrapped in black cloth, a trace from a distance, unseen. When the old woman buried the box at the foot of a tree, Edelia felt a cold shiver. In another part of the village, the freckled boy who had first asked her who he was, 𝕮𝖏𝖏, was beaten by his father, a man known for his anger. Edelia tried to approach him the next day, but the boy chased her away. I don't need your pity. Go back to the forest. She walked away silently, but his tears remained etched in her mind. Then, an unexpected event disturbed the entire village. A little girl disappeared. 𝕮𝖏𝖑, the miller's daughter, had not been seen since evening. People looked for her everywhere, in the forest, at the edge of the field, in wells, through barns. And then, the eyes of some turned to Edelia. She brought something bad, said a woman in a whisper. Since she came, everything has changed, murmured someone else. Edelia did not know what to do. She knew that she was not guilty, but the gazes pressed on her point. One morning, Floraea appeared in a dream, surrounded by flowers that withered at the touch of a shadow. Edelia, the world of people has deep wounds. Not everything you see is what it seems. Sometimes, those who speak the loudest hide the biggest secrets. You came to know life, but also the truth. Be careful. When she woke up, Edelia understood that she had to find out what had happened to the little girl. Not just to defend herself, but to fulfill what she felt in her heart, to bring light to the darkness. The next day, she set off alone to the forest. She had a suspicion, old 𝕮𝖊𝖑. She had buried something. Maybe there was an answer there. When she reached the tree in her dream, she gently dug into the ground. She took out the box wrapped in black cloth. Inside was a doll made of threads and yarn, pierced with needles, on which was written the name 𝕮𝖏𝖑. A shiver of fear gripped her. She returned to the village with the box in her arms. The old woman did this, one shouted. Black magic. Curse. The crowd gathered. Some wanted to chase Edelia away, accusing her of unearthing evil. Others were beginning to understand that the girl was not the problem, but the old shadows of the village. And that very evening, the little girl 𝕮𝖏𝖑 was found, scared but safe, hidden in an old cellar where she had fallen while playing. Now the truth had come to light. Edelia was not the enemy. She was the mirror of the village, one in which everyone began to see both what was beautiful and what had been hidden for too long. Chapter 6. Truths in the Light. The sun rose slowly over the village between the hills, pouring warm light over the tiled roofs and over the quivering leaves of the orchards. But that day, the light was no longer just a fleeting beauty. It was a revelation. Edelia stood in the middle of the square, with the doll in her hands. The tangled threads, the needles stuck in the cloth trunk, and the name written shakily in dry ink, 𝕮𝖏𝖑. The silence around was heavy, unsettling. That's what I found, said Edelia. She was buried under a tree, far away, in the forest. I just wanted to understand. Old 𝕮𝖊𝖑, leaning on a stick, hid her gaze under a thick scarf. But there was no fear in her eyes, but fatigued, a long silence fell over the people. Then the old woman said, "I made the doll, but I didn't want to hurt the child. Just to keep her away from my grandson. She was dear to him, but she made him forget about me. I was alone for too long." Her words didn't justify, but they explained. They didn't turn her into a criminal, but into a human, a wounded, weak, full of longing and fear. Edelia understood. People weren't evil by nature, but by unspoken wounds. "It's not about magic," she said, looking around. "It's about pain. About the desire to be seen, loved, chosen. Each of you carries a story in your soul that you haven't told anyone." Anka looked at her with wide eyes, while old Ali shook his head slowly, as if approving a secret judgment. "And you?" a woman asked. "Who are you, really, Edelia?" The question had been avoided many times. But now, in the light that forgave nothing, the girl could no longer remain silent. She approached the fountain, touched the cold edge of the stone and said, "I was born on a rock, in the mountains. I was a flower, cornflower that dreamed. I cried in my silence, for a life greater than that of a flower. And Floraea, the goddess of flowers, gave me a human form. But not answers. I must find those alone." The crowd was speechless. Some laughed in disbelief. Others crossed themselves. But those who truly looked her in the eyes saw boundless sincerity there. "You were a flower?" Mara whispered, coming to her side. Edelia nodded, smiling sadly. It was not a story to tell without fear. She knew that the truth could free, but it could also cut. "Then maybe that's why you know how to love the way you do," said the little girl. "You don't know how to hate." And at that moment, something changed. Not for everyone, but for enough. In the days that followed, the village was gripped by a kind of turmoil. Some said that Edelia had to leave, that she was an oddity, a creature that defied nature. But those who had been touched by her kindness rose to her defense. "Who are we to judge a soul just because it is different?" said the village priest, in a sermon that remained in everyone's hearts. "A flower doesn't ask for a name or a family name when it blooms under your window," said Ali in a gathering. "It just gives what it has: beauty, scent, life." Edelia, however, was not looking for power or praise. Instead, she felt a growing restlessness within herself. Since she had come into the world, she had witnessed the deepest corners of the human soul. She had learned about love, but also about the pain of being rejected. She had learned about hope, but also about the fear that suffocates her. "You have begun to blossom as a human being," Floraea told her in a dream. "But know that your root is not forgotten. The time will come when you will have to choose, to stay among people or to return to what you were. Choice." The word weighed like a stone on her chest. One morning, after a short summer rain, Edelia left the village and climbed a hill from where she could see everything. The houses with smoke coming out of their chimneys, the green gardens, the fountain, the church, the streets. There, in that moment of silence and solitude, she realized, people were not perfect. But they had something that no flower had: choice. The power to change, to make mistakes, and to repair, to love, even if they had been hurt. And for that, it was worth staying, to fight, to learn further. She returned to the village with her heart serene. She didn't know how much she would be loved or feared, but she knew she was alive, and that life, with all it brought, was worth living. For the first time since she had left the mountain, Edelia felt that she was no longer just a flower transformed into a girl. She was a soul, and she had only just begun to learn what that meant. Chapter 7. Guests from the Valley. After days full of unrest and truths spoken in the village square, silence slowly began to fall over the hills and the old houses with weathered roofs. Edelia felt that much was still hidden in the souls of the people, that their story was more complicated than she had thought. But, as she got used to life among people, a new unexpected presence would shake the apparent peace of the village to its foundations. On a cool morning, when the dew still shone on the blades of grass, a group of people descended from the valley on the road that wound towards the village. They were strangers, wearing different clothes, colorful and embroidered with strange embroidery for these places. They had unfamiliar faces, and their gaze was one filled with mystery and curiosity. The first to spot the village was old Ali, who, every morning, went out to greet his day with a walk through the village outskirts. And this time, he did not return alone. Edelia followed them, who felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Who were these people? And what were they doing in their quiet village? The people of the village began to gather around the guests with astonished, sometimes hostile looks. Voices murmured, and old eyes hid their suspicion under frowning eyebrows. "They are merchants," said the village mayor, a man with a bushy mustache, approaching the strangers. "They come to sell and buy." But Edelia felt that their presence was more than just a simple business. With her clear eyes, she sought to penetrate beyond their words. That day, Edelia was invited by the mayor to attend a dinner offered to guests. Tea was an old tradition, an opportunity to meet and negotiate, but also to get to know each other. She accepted, feeling that this was a new gateway to understanding. The world she lived in, the long table, lit by lanterns with flickering flames. Edelia observed the guests as they told stories in their melodious languages. Some wore jewelry with unknown symbols, others held objects made of precious metals and colored stones. A tall man with a red beard and intense blue eyes looked at her carefully. "You are new here, right?" he asked with a warm smile. "Yes," said Edelia, shy but curious. "I am 𝕰𝖊𝖑𝖑, and we come from the valley beyond the mountains. We are merchants, but also seekers of stories." The questions began to flow. Where had she come from? What had brought her here? What was her story? Edelia told briefly, feeling that 𝕰𝖊𝖑 was really listening to her, without judgment or fear. As the conversation continued, around the fire, another guest, a woman with dark hair and piercing eyes, approached Edelia. "You have a special soul," he said to her. "It is not easy to be between two worlds." "I do not know yet if I can stop here," Edelia answered honestly. "Sometimes the road takes us further, sometimes it brings us home." Her words remained in the air like a promise and a mystery. That night, Edelia dreamed again of Floraea, who told her, "New guests bring change, be open-minded. Not everything that seems friendly is so, and not everything that is foreign is an enemy." The morning found her with scattered thoughts, searching for answers. In the days that followed, Edelia accompanied the guests through the village, learning to know their customs and stories. But not everyone was delighted with their arrival. Some voices in the village began to murmur again in fear, and others saw in Edelia a bond between people and strangers. As time passed, Edelia understood that the guests brought with them not only treasures and rare goods, but also secrets from other worlds, old stories and perhaps even dangers. And she, the little girl who had once been a cornflower on rock, she had to learn to adapt again, this time not just as a girl among people, but as a bridge between worlds. Chapter 8. Rodu's Smile. The days passed slowly in the village between the hills, and the presence of the guests from the valley brought with it a new agitation, but also a deep misunderstanding in the souls of the people. Edelia, still searching for her place, began to feel how the burden of loneliness and misunderstanding was pressing down on her more and more. But on one of those quiet mornings, when the dew had barely melted on the green grass and the air smelled of flowers and fresh earth, a simple gesture would change everything. He stood in front of her with a wide, sincere smile, his big, brown and warm eyes like honey escaping between the branches of the trees. Rodu was a boy from the village, known for his gentle nature, and for the way he knew how to see the beauty in the simplest things. He was a child of the earth, a pure and open soul, in contrast to many of the judgmental looks that Edelia had encountered in the last few weeks. In his hand, he held a flower, a small flower, of an immaculate white, with fine and delicate petals, which he had carefully plucked from near the village fountain. "I brought this for you," he said in a warm voice, which asked for nothing in return, just a moment of joy. Edelia looked at the flower, then at his eyes, and felt for the first time in a long time how a pleasant warmth spread in her soul. Tea was a small gesture, but in it was hidden a whole world of acceptance and friendship. "Thank you," she replied, smiling shyly. "It's beautiful." "It's the flower that grows near the fountain," Rodu told her, pointing to the green place. "I wanted you to know that you are not alone here." That morning, the sunlight seemed to penetrate deeper into her heart, thawing the fog of sadness and fears that surrounded her. Edelia felt how, for the first time, a true connection began to form between her and this world that until then had seemed so foreign to her. Days had passed since she felt like she was struggling to understand people, and now, with Rodu's smile, it seemed like she was getting a chance to be truly seen, to have someone who would accept her without prejudice or fear. In the following weeks, the friendship between Edelia and Rodu grew like a fragile flower that shyly faces the sun's rays. They spent hours talking, laughing and discovering the world together. Rodu showed her the secrets of the village. The places where the best kites grow, the hidden paths in the forest, the sky full of stars on clear nights. Edelia told him about the mountains, about how she had once been a lonely flower on a rock, about the call to life, and about the complex world of people. Radu listened with his eyes wide open, with pure curiosity and without a trace of judgment. "You have a beautiful soul," he told her one day, while they were walking by the river. "And I'm happy that you're here among us." Those simple words echoed in Edelia's heart like an echo of hope. In Radu's presence, she was no longer the lonely flower on the rock, but a girl who had the right to dream, to love and to be loved. But not everything was just joy in Edelia's eyes. The shadows of worries and fear for others appeared more and more often. The guests from the valley still unsettled the villagers, and the tensions in the village did not disappear completely. Radu felt her turmoil and tried to support her gently. He was the first to bring her a smile in difficult moments, and the first to encourage her to move forward, not to let herself be brought down by bad words or hostile looks. "You are stronger than you think," he often told her. "And I will always be by your side." One day, while they were walking on the edge of the forest, Radu gave her another flower, this time a wild one, red as fire. "Because you are like this flower, rare and beautiful," he said with a smile. "You just have to learn to grow in this world." Edelia looked at him and felt a warmth in her chest. Slowly, the walls of loneliness began to crumble, and in their place appeared something she had never known before: trust in others and in herself. This friendship was the beginning of a new life for her, a life in which she was not just a flower on the rock, but a being capable of loving and being loved. And Radu's smile became for Edelia a guiding light on the days when the world seemed too big and too difficult to understand. Chapter 9. Days of Light. With the arrival of spring, the village between the hills woke up to life under the gentle rays of the sun. The air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers and freshly grown grass, and the song of the birds sounded like an old and soothing melody. For Edelia, these days were a true rebirth. After all the loneliness and uncertainty she had experienced since she became human, spring now brought her a promise: days of light, friendship and discoveries. On the morning of a clear day, Edelia woke up with the thought that she had to learn to live like others, to get closer to people and get involved in their world. She no longer wanted to be just a simple observer, but part of the community. She knew that it would not be easy, but she realized that, step by step, she could forge her own path. She received her first lesson from her mother Anka, the woman who took care of the village household and was known for her skill in all the necessities of a home. Edelia arrived in the kitchen of their small home, where the fire crackled gently in the stove, and the smell of fresh bread mixed with that of dried herbs. "Today you will learn to make pies," said Mother Anka, smiling. "It's a good start, and people will be happy to taste what you do." First, Edelia's movements were clumsy. She mixed too much, rolled out the dough too thick or too thin. But Mother Anka was patient and gently showed her how to use her hands. Slowly, the pies took shape, and their smell spread warmth and joy throughout the house. While the dough was rising, Edelia accompanied Radu to the village spring. Tea was a quiet walk, full of talk about flowers, mountains and dreams. Radu told her about his friends, about the old songs they often sang on summer evenings, and about the customs that gave the village a special charm. Back in the house, Edelia discovered that learning was an adventure in itself. After the pies were taken out of the oven, Mother Anka took her hand and led her to the bright window of the room where the village women gathered to sewing. Here, Edelia learned to hold a needle and thread, to carefully cut simple embroideries on thick woolen clothes. Each stitch was a small story, and in each thread there was an invisible connection with the past and the people who wore it. Friendship began to bloom around her, not only through the connection with Radu, but also because of these moments spent with the women of the village. They looked at her with warm, curious eyes, and Edelia felt less and less of a stranger. She made friends, and every smile she received was a flower in the garden of her soul. In the evening, under the soft light of the lamp on the table, Edelia also discovered the power of song in the small school in the village. An old teacher, Mr. Petre, showed her the first notes of some folk songs. Her voice, at first shy and unsure, she began to gather courage and soar over the hills, accompanied by the old man's delicate whistle. "Song is the language of the heart," he told her. "It will bring you courage and friends, don't hesitate to use it." And Edelia sang. She sang like a flower opening to the sun, like a little girl discovering the world in colors and sounds. Her voice spread across the village, bringing hope and joy to those who listened to her. People began to look at her with different eyes, not just as a girl from the mountains, but as someone who brought light and warmth into their lives as the days passed. Edelia became more and more integrated into the community. Mornings often found her on the outskirts of the village, in the garden where several women cultivated vegetables and flowers. She learned to water, pull weeds and talk to the earth, just as she once talked to the wind and the sun on the ridge point one afternoon, while sewing a cloth with Mara, a girl her age. Edelia told her stories about her life in the mountains, about the cornflowers and the desire that had brought her among people. "You are special," Mara told her, taking her hand. "I have never been to the mountains, but I would like to see your world." Their friendship grew stronger, and Edelia felt the fear of loneliness receding. Now she knew that she had someone to rely on, that she could be herself and share with others the joys and sorrows of life. The days of light continued to spread over the village, and Edelia discovered that every teaching, every smile and every song were steps towards her own transformation. She was no longer just the little girl who had been a cornflower on the rock, but a being who was growing, blossoming and learning to love the world. One evening, as the sun set over the hills and the sky filled with stars, Edelia sat on a stone by the fountain and looked out into the distance. Her thoughts intertwined with the silence of the evening and the promise of the days to come. "Thank you," she whispered, to the wind that caressed her face, "for all the days of light." She knew that her journey was just beginning, but for the first time she had the courage to look forward with hope and trust. Friendship, the joy of learning, and love for people illuminated her path, and the world that once seemed foreign was slowly turning into home. Chapter 10. The Shadow of Jealousy. The days full of light and friendship were beginning to be filled with subtle shadows in the village between the hills. Somewhere, in the middle of the crowd that was enjoying the arrival of spring, a presence was beginning to spread a cold and oppressive energy. The woman 𝕰𝖊𝖑𝖑𝖎, known in the village for her fierce nature and for the pride that accompanied her everywhere, looked with critical eyes at everything that Edelia learned and received. For her, the presence of the little girl who came from the mountains was not only a novelty, but a threat. 𝕰𝖊𝖑𝖑𝖎 was an elderly woman, with her hair tied tightly in a bun, and her face was often frowned. In her youth she had been a beautiful young woman, and now, although the years had passed, she still retained an arrogance and jealousy that sometimes made her difficult for others to bear. She liked to be the center of attention, and could not bear to see how Edelia quickly gained the affection of the people and, especially, the friendship of the boy Radu, who was a very appreciated person in the village. One morning, as Edelia was leaving the house with a basket full of fruits picked from the garden, 𝕰𝖊𝖑𝖑𝖎 was standing on the threshold of her house, with her arms crossed and a cold look. When he saw her, he could not control his irritation. "So, the girl from the mountain," he told her in a sharp tone, "you should know that not all people here look at you with kind eyes, and I don't believe all your stories." Edelia, surprised by the harsh words, tried to answer gently, "I don't want to upset anyone, I'm just trying to integrate and learn." But 𝕰𝖊𝖑𝖑𝖎 wasn't satisfied with the answers. An idea was starting to sprout in her mind. If people paid attention to her, she could make her suffer, isolate her even more. She knew that the people of the village sometimes feared what they didn't understand, and rumors could be the perfect weapon. In the following days, 𝕰𝖊𝖑𝖑𝖎 began to tell stories and gossip about Edelia on street corners. She had started with little innocent lies, but gradually these turned into baseless accusations, designed to drive away the trust that others had in the little girl. "Did you hear what they were saying?" she said to some women gathered near the fountain. "Rumor has it that the girl is not who she says she is. That she comes from the mountains, but she is no ordinary girl. Maybe she has connections with spirits and brings trouble to the village." Sometimes, at the village fair, she would murmur to the people that Edelia was nothing but a stranger who had no right to interfere in their affairs. "She says she can sing and sew, but who knows what kind of spells she learns?" she asked, with a contemptuous smile. The rumors were spreading with unexpected speed, and in the souls of some a shadow of fear and distrust began to grow. Some began to look at Edelia with suspicion, and the harsh words hurt her more than she could have imagined, an occasion for anxiety for the girl who, until recently, was learning to sing and laugh with her friends. One day, while Edelia was walking down the village street, she heard raised voices from the market. Several women were talking in whispers, and their looks were not friendly. "I heard that girl brings bad luck. Who knows what will happen next," said an old woman with narrowed eyes. Edelia felt her heart tremble, and a new weight appeared in her chest, hard to bear. She knew that the truth was not like that, but words had a strange power, which could change people and transform friendship into isolation. That evening, she sought refuge in the forest near the village, where the silence and the rustling of the trees helped her clear her thoughts. She thought about the Fairy Floraea, about her words about people, about love and hate, and about how difficult it was sometimes to learn to live among them. Why do some people choose to spread hatred? She asked herself sadly, looking at the starry sky. The answer didn't come to her, but she knew that she had to be strong and not let herself be brought down by the shadows that tried to surround her. In the weeks that followed, Edelia tried not to pay attention to the gossip, but it wasn't easy. Some glances avoided her, and the children's laughter sometimes became ironic. Even Mara, her closest friend, seemed to be caught in the web of insecurity, although she tried to support her. "It's not easy to be different," Mara told her one day, taking her hand. "But I am here, and I will not leave you alone." Those words were a ray of hope in the darkness that threatened to gather. Rodu, in turn, could not bear to see how much Edelia was suffering. Gently, he told her that she should not let the bad things bring her down, and that their friendship was stronger than any rumor. "I know who you really are, and that is what matters," he told her firmly. "The world can say what it wants, but I will always be by your side." However, despite the support of her loved ones, Edelia understood that the shadows of jealousy did not disappear so easily. Her days began to be marked by moments when she felt alone and misunderstood, and the desire to return to the mountains, among the cornflowers, began to grow in her heart. One morning, while watching the sun rise over the hills, Edelia made a decision. She would not let herself be defeated by the shadows, nor allow hatred to defeat the light she had found in true friends and within herself. She had to fight, to show people who she really was and to learn to defend her soul. This was a new fight, very different from the one on the mountain, but just as important. It was the fight for acceptance, for the right to be who she was and to love the world without fear of rejection. The shadow of jealousy, no matter how dark and deep it was, would be defeated by the light of courage and friendship. And Edelia was ready to face this challenge, knowing that she was not alone. Chapter 11. Hidden Tears. After the shadows of jealousy began to spread over the village, Edelia felt her heart being increasingly weighed down by a new and profound sadness. Until then, the solitude on the mountain had been a state of tranquility and dreaming, a natural solitude, surrounded by the pure beauty of nature. But now, when she was among people, with her soul open and full of desires, every suspicious glance and every malicious word penetrated deep into her, leaving unseen wounds. On that early summer morning, the sky was covered with thick clouds, and the wind blew coldly through the branches of the trees. Edelia woke up with a lump in her throat, without knowing exactly why. As soon as she went outside, she felt the weight of sadness press down on her even harder. The rumors, the evasive glances and the words she had heard in recent weeks had gathered into a burden which she could no longer ignore. On the way to the fountain, the place where she used to meet her friends, she felt that all eyes were turned towards her, but not with the warmth and friendship of the past. Some faces were cold, others filled with distrust, and some children were afraid to say even a simple hello. Her heart skipped a beat, and a tear rolled down her cheek, without wanting to. She hid behind a bush near the fountain, and there, in her solitude, she gave in to the pain. The tears flowed in a row, and the sadness she felt was so deep that she felt she could lose herself in it. She had not been prepared for this facet of life. Until then, there had only been serene days, full of discoveries and friendship, but now the poisonous words and judgmental looks were stealing the light from her soul. But the sadness was only the beginning. Edelia also felt a deep injustice, an infinite frustration that the people she had admired so much and wanted to understand and love so much could be so cruel for no reason. She who had come with an open heart and a desire to share her joys was now being treated like a stranger, a fog she had to beware of. She stood there, alone and crying. Her thoughts flew to the Fairy Floraea. She remembered the words of the flower goddess. People have souls, and some have evil souls. They love, but they also hate. Now she truly understood what those words meant. People were capable of beauty and light, but also of darkness and suffering. Tea was a hard lesson she could not avoid. After wiping away her tears, Edelia felt a warm hand on her shoulder. Tea was Mara, her friend, who had been looking for her with despair and who, seeing her crying, had not hesitated to help her. "You are not alone," Mara whispered to her. "We all go through hard times, but we must be strong. I once felt this pain too." Mara's support brought a ray of hope to Edelia's soul. She understood that sadness was not a weakness, but a part of life, and accepting it was the first step towards healing. He took courage to go through pain and get up again, and in the days that followed, Edelia learned to hide her tears, not to let them overwhelm her, but to never deny them. Every sad moment became a lesson for her about her own inner strength. She began to observe people more closely, to see not only their mean faces, but also those moments when they showed their kindness, no matter how rare they were. One evening, in the house of the small village, around the fire, Edelia told with a trembling voice about the pain and injustice she had experienced. She had felt. The people listened in silence, and some of them, the oldest and wisest, remembered times when they too had been judged or misunderstood. In that moment, a bridge of understanding and compassion was built between those present, and Edelia felt the shadow of sadness begin to dissipate. Although the hidden tears had begun to transform into the power of a new understanding, Edelia knew that her path among people would not always be easy. But with each step, with each friendship and with each act of kindness, she would learn to overcome the pain and bring light and hope to those around her. This was the true adventure of her life: to grow, to love and to forgive, even when the world seemed to be merciless. Chapter 12. The Heart That Loves. After they had passed through the shadows of sadness, and the rumors had slowly begun to lose their power, Edelia rediscovered the light. This time a new one, warmer, deeper. It was a light that did not come from outside, but from her soul, a light that was born every time 𝕮𝖊𝖑 smiled at her. 𝕮𝖊𝖑 had always been there. The quiet friend, the boy with warm eyes and a gentle voice, who knew when to be silent and when to say something that would comfort her. He did not judge, did not ask for explanations, did not fall prey to rumors. Ever since the day he had given her a flower, Edelia had felt a special warmth in his presence, but only now was she beginning to understand what was sprouting, secretly, in her heart. 𝕮𝖊𝖑 often invited her to accompany him in his work in the fields, or to teach her things about the village, about the earth, about the sky. They went together on the paths between the hills. They gathered medicinal plants, talked about stars and dreams, and such moments, Edelia felt free, complete. His presence made her forget everything that had been heavy and oppressive. And his laughter. His laughter was the music that softened all the sharp corners of her fear. One day, in the warm light of sunset, 𝕮𝖊𝖑 took her to a hidden clearing, where wild flowers covered the earth like a blanket of colors. There, without haste, he showed her how to make a whistle from elder wood, talked to her about the legends of the place and said, simply, "You see the world differently, Edelia. It's as if you carry something from heaven inside you." Those words stirred her. She didn't even know if she deserved them, but there was not a shred of doubt in his eyes. And then, without saying anything, Edelia felt for the first time that new, disturbing, gentle and strong feeling, an unspoken love, which was not learned, but discovered, like a rare flower in the heart. As the days passed, the two spent more and more time together. They went to the river, played with the children, mowed together in Mara's yard, listened to the stories of the elders and dreamed. 𝕮𝖊𝖑 listened to her patiently when she talked about the mountain, about the cornflower and about the dream of understanding people. He did not laugh, he did not wonder. He just nodded and kept the secret. On a rainy afternoon, they had taken shelter in an old shed, on the edge of the village. The rain beat on the roof like a sad and sweet symphony, and Edelia, trembling a little, hugged her knees to her chest. "Why are people sometimes so hard?" she asked, looking at the floor. 𝕮𝖊𝖑 was silent for a moment, then answered, "Because not everyone knows how to feel how you feel. You see their heart, but they only see what scares them. And what you don't understand, sometimes you hurt." His words calmed her. She looked at him and thought that maybe, if the world were full of people like 𝕮𝖊𝖑, there would be no more wars, envy or suffering. And then, this thought gave birth to another, more mysterious one. What if she and 𝕮𝖊𝖑 were always together? One summer evening, in the midst of a celebration, when the village had dressed up in song and dance costumes, 𝕮𝖊𝖑 took her by the hand and led her to the dance hall in the middle of the square. Edelia, at first ashamed, felt her heart leap out of her chest. She had never danced like this, with people. She had never felt that joy of belonging, that energy of hands that clasp, of steps that connect, of hearts that beat in the same rhythm. And everything was possible only because he was there, next to her. With eyes full of light and a warm smile, it was a magical evening. Edelia didn't know if it was real or a dream, but it didn't matter. In the light of the torches, in the gentle dance of the linden leaves, she felt that she was truly living. That night, under the sky full of stars, Edelia no longer cried. She smiled. Because love had taken root in her. And it wasn't a fiery, hasty love, but a silent, powerful one that grew moment by moment. It was the way Radu looked at her without asking for anything. The way he protected her without fence. The way he gave her courage without words. In Edelia's soul, the marigold had bloomed again, not on the rock, but deep in her heart. And it was more alive, brighter than ever. It was her love for Radu, pure, silent, sincere. But along with love, she also learned a new fear. The fear of losing. The fear of not being worthy. The fear of being hurt. But true love did not demand perfection. Radu did not ask for promises, nor answers. He let her feel at her own pace. And so, slowly, step by step, Edelia's heart became stronger. Love did not weaken her, it healed her. It gave her wings. He taught her that life is not just beauty or pain, but a fabric of both, and that it is worth living and loving, even when you are afraid. It was just the beginning. But that summer, under the clear sky, Edelia learned the most beautiful lesson, that a heart that truly loves is never alone. Chapter 13. Betrayal. Summer flowed peacefully in the village between the hills. The fields were golden, the plums were full, and the people, although in a hurry with their work, found time for stories on the porch, for celebrations in the fields, and for dances in the evening. Edelia felt almost happy. Almost, because an unseen shadow lurked in the corner of her eye. 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝖑𝖏, the elderly woman who had always looked at her with suspicion, had not lost her interest in the young woman who came from nowhere. If at first her words had been just whispers slipped among the neighbors, now they were taking shape, fueled by envy, distrust and superstition. 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝖑 felt her influence threatened by Edelia's sincere smile and the increasingly frequent glances that Radu was casting at the girl. One Sunday, when the village had gathered at the church, and the sun was quietly descending through the thick leaves of the walnut trees, 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝖑 plotted what would remain in Edelia's memory as the dark day of betrayal. With a raised voice and theatrical gestures, she went out in front of the crowd and, while the priest was still reading from the book, she burst out, "Stop! Stop everyone! For there is an unclean creature among us, a witch. You were blind, but I told you from the beginning. You don't know where she comes from. She has no parents. She has no past. And, alas, she doesn't get sick, she doesn't grow old. And how come flowers bloom in her palm?" A heavy silence descended on the villagers. Edelia, standing next to Mara and Radu, felt her knees weaken. She didn't understand. She couldn't understand how someone could simply misinterpret her gift as something bad. I saw her talking to the wind, to the birds. I saw how she conquered Radu with spells. She's not human, but a forest creature. And what fairy comes without a name, without a past? 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝖑 thundered, pointing her finger at her. The people murmured, and from the murmur a doubt was born. When fear creeps into hearts, even the warmest souls can turn pale. The priest, old and tired, looked at Edelia for a long time, not knowing what to say. But Radu stepped forward, his forehead raised. "She's not a witch. Edelia is good. She helped people, took care of children, brought light to our village. You are afraid because she is different, but that does not mean she is bad." But his words had not been enough. In the eyes of some, fear had already taken root. Voices were raised demanding that the girl be chased away, to return where she came from. An old woman said that her cat had fallen ill since Edelia had passed through the gate. Another man claimed that his wife had not been sleeping well since she had been dreaming of the girl with golden hair. The lies were gathering, merging, spinning around her like a whirlwind. Edelia could no longer speak. Unshed tears burned in her eyes. She wanted to run, but her legs would not respond. Her heart was beating in her chest like a drum of grief. She felt betrayed, not only by 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝖑, but also by all those who had known her, welcomed her, smiled at her. Where were the smiles now? Where was the kindness? Mara shook her hand, but she was also scared. And when several men approached Edelia, intending to force her away, Radu sat between them and the girl he loved. "If you drive Edelia away, drive me away too. You will not raise a hand against her." Radu was a respected young man, but in the face of fear, respect quickly melted. However, his gesture was not forgotten. Some braver young men hesitated to join the crowd. Two old men shook their heads, dissatisfied with 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝖑's fanaticism. But the tide was too strong. Under pressure from the villagers, Edelia was pushed out of the churchyard. They hadn't thrown her out yet, but they had isolated her. Nobody spoke to her anymore. Nobody gave her water or bread anymore. Mara tried to help her secretly, but she couldn't risk too much. Radu was being watched. The village had closed in on the girl who had come with a pure soul. In those dark days, Edelia could no longer look in the mirror. She no longer sang. She no longer dreamed. She lived in a small hut on the outskirts of the village, where the wind always blew, as if crying with the she. And yet, she didn't hate. She couldn't. Although she had been hurt, betrayed, rejected, her heart had remained the same. She hadn't learned to hate. She had only learned to suffer, and she waited. She waited for the storm to pass, for a sign to appear, to hear a friendly voice again. One night, when the moon was full and the silence was heavy as lead, Edelia went outside and looked at the sky. There were tears in her eyes, but also a light. And then, in the deep silence, she whispered, "Floraea, you told me that some people love, others hate. You told me that life is a difficult gift. But you didn't tell me how much betrayal hurts. And yet, even in that pain, Edelia felt that something in her could not be broken. A core of light remained unextinguished. Maybe it was love for Radu. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the deep root of what she once had been, a cornflower, grown on a rock, battered by the winds, but still alive. Betrayal was a difficult mountain to climb, but Edelia understood, looking at the sky, that she would not stop there. Above all, her heart had not given up on loving. Chapter 14. Escape to the mountains. Night had fallen over the village between the hills like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The wind blew weakly, barely touching the leaves of the trees, and the moon seemed to stand still in the sky, a silent witness to the pain of a wounded heart. In the hut on the edge of the village, Edelia had gathered her few things: a white scarf she received from Mara, a pressed flower wrapped in a handkerchief, and a small wooden whistle, carved by Radu a long time ago. She had nothing else. And she didn't need it. Either. What was heaviest was what she carried in her chest, a torn heart. That night, Edelia made the decision. She would leave. She had no place, but she knew where: to her mountain, to the rocky ridge where she had been a flower, to where the wind whispered her name before she learned it from the mouths of people. The village had hurt her too much. Deep trust had been shattered, and yet, instead of hatred, she carried within her a new calm, a gentle determination, born of suffering. She would return to the mountains. Maybe there she would find her balance. Maybe there, between the sky and the stone, she would understand why she was brought among people. She left without telling anyone. Only the moon and the dew-drenched grass listened to her light steps. She did not want to cause Radu and Mara any more trouble. If she stayed, danger was still in the air. Maricica was not the only one who wanted her gone. People do not easily forget fear. And fear, once planted, sprouts faster than hope. The climb to the mountain was difficult. The road was overgrown with roots, slippery stones, branches that scratched her arms. But she did not complain. Her legs ached, and her soul even harder. She walked without looking back. She did not want to see the village reduced by the distance. Each step took her closer to her crest, to the place where she was born from petals and magic. As she climbed, the air became cleaner, harsher, more alive. The night spread over the peaks, and the stars shone like old and benevolent lighthouses. The forest received her in silence. The leaves rustled faintly, and an owl followed her with round and gentle eyes, and no creature seemed to be afraid of her. On the contrary, it was as if nature itself recognized her. After hours of climbing, she reached a clearing where a clear spring flowed. She stopped there, exhausted. She washed her face, cooled her feet, and drank cold water straight from her palm. In that deep silence, she felt for the first time since she had been banished that she could breathe. In the forest, no one judged her. Not a crooked tree, not a broken stone, not a dry grass. Each thing had its place, and she, Edelia, found hers again. The night passed, and dawn found her lying on a bed of leaves. When she woke up, a ray of sunlight caressed her cheek. The birds were chirping, and the smell of resin and damp earth filled his nostrils. He got up and started again. He climbed higher and higher, among junipers, rocks and ice fangs, following paths known only to black goats and old winds. After a day and a night of walking, he finally reached the ridge where he had once grown. The place was unchanged. The wind was blowing hard, and the clouds walked unhindered over the peaks. On the edge of a cliff, a cornflower grew, shy and lonely, like the one it had once been. Edelia stopped in front of it and, without realizing it, tears rolled down her cheeks. You are like me, she whispered. Maybe I am still you. And maybe I have never really changed. She sat down next to the flower and looked at the valley. The village was a small spot, barely visible among the hills. Everything that had been there, the smiles, the songs, the joys, now seemed a transparent memory, like a distant dream. The days passed, one after another, silent and gentle. Edelia did not speak to anyone, but listened to everything. The voice of the wind, the rustling of the grass, the song of the stones. She made a small fire with twigs, drank water from the springs and ate berries. She was part of nature again. She was no longer Edelia the girl, but Edelia the being, something between a human and a flower, between a fairy and a lost girl. One day, while she was walking barefoot on the rock, she raised her arms to the sky and shouted, "Floraea, you heard me when I first called you. Hear me now, I am still me. You transformed me so that I could know people. Now I know I have loved, I have suffered. And yet, I do not regret it. But I do not know who I am. Am I a flower or a girl? Am I a man or something else?" The wind answered her with a long moan, like an old sigh. No goddess came. But Edelia knew she had been heard. That maybe one day, an answer would come. In the mountains, time flowed differently. One day seemed like a moment, one moment seemed like an eternity. But in that silence, Edelia was healing. Slowly, the pain no longer bit her. The betrayal no longer bled, and the empty place in her chest, something began to grow again. Maybe not hope, but a deep silence, a peace that did not depend on others. One evening, watching the sunset, she felt a step back. She turned, and no one, but in her heart, a beat, like a whisper. "Edelia, you were a flower on the rock. And you learned to be a human. But what is a human if not a flower that lives and dies? You have known evil, but you chose good. You are what you choose to be." She didn't know if it had been Floraea or just a thought. But she stood up and smiled for the first time in many days. Edelia was no longer the same. But she was slowly becoming what she was meant to be. Chapter 15. The Fairies Return. The dawn of a new day was pouring over the steep peaks of the mountains, painting the rocks with soft gold and bluish shadows. The air was cold, clean, charged with the smell of resin and wet stone. Edelia sat on the edge of the precipice, wrapped in a woolen shawl, her eyes lost in the valley. She missed Rhodu, the laughter of the children, the gentle fire in Mara's house. But even more painful was the question that would not give her peace. Who am I now? The silence of the mountain enveloped her like a wordless prayer. In that silence, she felt the mountain speak to her. Not with words, but with the feel of the stone, with the breath of the wind and the rustle of the grass. But that morning, the silence was interrupted by a different breeze, one that seemed to bring with it old memories, the sense of flowers, a thrill of magic. Edelia looked up. In the distance, through the mist and the diffuse light, a silhouette shone, gently descending the rocky path. It did not walk, it floated. Its garment was woven of moving petals, its long silver hair flowed like a waterfall of light, and its eyes were like two deep lakes, full of mercy and wisdom. "Floraea," whispered Edelia, with a thrill in her heart. The flower fairy, the forgotten goddess of gentle nature, was coming again at the call of a troubled heart. She stopped in front of the girl and said not a word. She just held out her hand, and Edelia, overcome with emotion, touched it lightly, like a sacred breeze. When their hands touched, the surrounding earth turned green for a moment, and the cornflowers bloomed spontaneously, as if happy to see each other again. "I heard you, child," whispered Floraea in a voice that was more like a vibration of light than a sound. Edelia bowed her head, ashamed. "I wasn't ready for humans. I thought their love was everything. I didn't know they could be harsh. Was I wrong to ask to be human?" The fairy did not judge her. She sat down next to her on the rock and looked, like Edelia, at the valley. "You were not wrong. You chose. That is all a living being can do. And your choice made you more than a flower and deeper than a human. You understood suffering. You loved. You lost. You forgave." Silence fell for a few moments, but it was not an oppressive silence, but a beneficent one, like an unseen embrace. "When I transformed you, I told you that people love, but also hate," Floraea continued. "You have tasted both. Now the question is, what do you want to do next?" Edelia felt her eyes water. I felt torn from everything I was. Neither flower nor girl, I am between worlds, and nowhere. The fairy reached out and touched Edelia's chest with her fingertip. You are the place where the two worlds meet. You are the bridge. The girl shook her head slowly. But people don't want me. They chased me away. They called me a witch. Because I was different. Because I loved. Because you were alive, Floraea said, with infinite gentleness. People are afraid of what they don't understand. But it is precisely in this fear that lies the chance to teach them. Not with words, but with the strength of the heart. Edelia fell silent. Her thoughts were like autumn leaves, shaken by the wind. What can I do? She asked finally. I can't go back. The wounds are deep. The fairy looked towards the ridge, where the lonely cornflower swayed in the wind. Every flower has a time to bloom. Then it withers. But you have had the luck and the burden to bloom twice. The first time as a flower. The second as a human. Now you can bloom a third time, as whoever you choose to be. What does this mean? Edelia asked, her eyebrows furrowed. It means that you don't have to be either a flower or a girl. You can be a story. You can be a song. You can be healing. You can go from village to village, not as a runaway, but as a traveler of the heart. You can be for others what I was for you, a gentle answer to an unspoken question. The fairy's words fell like dew on the girl's dry soul. But I have nothing that no homed, no real named, no road. The fairy smiled, a smile that made the sky clearer. Your name is Edelia.D. Oh, you know what it means? The girl shook her head. In the ancient language of flowers, Edelia means the one who grows from pain and gives light. Tears were now flowing freely down the girl's cheek. Not of sadness, but of recognition, of acceptance. I will go. But not back. Not yet. I will go where I am needed, to listen, to learn, to tell the story of the mountain, of the flower, of the girl. Of love, Floraea added. The fairy stood up. She seemed to melt in the light. Her hair fluttered like a forest of silver on her chest. A pendant of petals sparkled for a moment and broke away, floating to Edelia's hands. Wear it. Not as a memory, but as a promise. Will we see each other again? The fairy did not answer directly. You will no longer need to call me, when you learn to recognize me in every leaf that falls, in every old man who smiles, in every child who tells you the truth without fear. Then, with a flicker of light, Floraea disappeared. The wind stopped. The sun rose. Edelia was left alone, but she no longer felt loneliness as a burden. Tea was different now, a cold in the heart of the mountain. With the pendant hanging around her neck and her soul renewed, Edelia stood up. It was time to leave again. Not to run, but to walk. Chapter 16. A New Choice. The sun was setting slowly over the mountain peaks, enveloping them in a warm reddish light, like a silent embrace. Edelia slowly climbed, with small but determined steps, the steep slope that led to the ridge where she had once grown in the form of a cornflower. Each step was an echo of the past, each breath a tribute to the life she had lived. She walked not like a fugitive, but like a being rediscovering her roots. A gentle restlessness burned in her heart, that of an approaching choice. The fairy. Floraea had given her a gift, but also a responsibility. She had not imposed it on her. She had placed it in her hands, like a seed, to choose for herself what would grow from it. Up at the top, the wind was blowing hard, but it was not unwelcoming. It was pure, sincere, a mountain wind that does not lie. Edelia stopped, let the fairy pendant fall over her chest and closed her eyes. Behind her, the silent steps of the Fairy Floraea approached, as if they had been called by the girl's silence itself. You came, her voice whispered, like a leaf touching the ground. Edelia opened her eyes. The fairy seemed brighter than ever, but also simpler, more human. She had pulled her hair back, and in her eyes there was not only eternity, but also understanding, almost compassion. Yes, I came. You said I could choose again, Edelia said. And you have this right, because you have known what it means to be human. You have felt love, but also betrayal. Joy, but also pain. You have lived with an open heart, even when it hurt you. Few people manage to do this. And no flower, Floraea said gently. Edelia fell silent. Her thoughts were like a river struggling between two banks. If I choose to become a flower again, I will no longer feel all this. There will be peace, right? There will be peace, But not the one you learned to value, the fairy replied. You will be part of the mountain again. You will remember everything, but you will no longer have desire and no suffering. But no dreams. The girl pressed her hands to her chest. The petal pendant sparkled faintly, and her heart, 𝕮𝖗's name, pulsed like a living wound. She remembered his gentle gaze, the flower he had given her, his sincere laughter. But she also remembered the cries of the others, the accusations, the unjustified fear. She remembered the pain that she did not fully understand even now. The love was real. But why did it hurt so much? Floraea touched her forehead, and for a moment, all the memories came back with painful clarity. Mara smiled, 𝕮𝖗's eyes. The children who had taught her songs. But also the stones thrown, 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝖑𝖆's venomous words, the loneliness in the eyes of people who no longer had the courage to look at her. Because it was deep. And because your soul is young. Flower or human, it is not easy to be alive. And yet, something in me wants to stay. I don't know if it's love or just curiosity. Maybe it's hope or madness, Edelia said, looking into the distance. The fairy smiled. This time, not with pity, but with pride. That's humanity, child. To choose life even after it has hurt you. To move on without certainties. To love again, without the promise of being loved. To search, without knowing if you will find. And if I choose to remain human? Then you stay with everything you have become. But you can't come back, flower. The chosen life is a life assumed. Edelia closed her eyes. She let the wind dry her tears and clear her thoughts. Inside her, there was no longer any fear. Only truth. I want to stay. Not to go back to the village. Maybe that's not where I belong. But somewhere in the world, there are people who need someone like me. Who know how to love without judging. I want to find them. Then choose. With your heart. The girl reached out her hand with the pendant. The petals began to shine. Their light rose to the sky, drawing a thin trail of light on the evening sky. Then the pendant merged with the girl's skin, leaving in its place a trace of a petal, a delicate, white flower, imprinted on her chest, a sign that, once, she had been more than human. Floraea looked solemnly. You are now a complete being. Not a flower. Not just a human. You are the bridge. And what will I do next? You will go. The world is big. There is much pain, but also beauty. You will be healing for those who have forgotten what it means to listen. And one day, perhaps, you will return. Not as a lost woman, but as a story told by flowers and kept by pure hearts. The fairy began to withdraw. She did not disappear suddenly, but moved away like a breeze that does not want to leave the place empty, but to leave it full of meaning. Edelia looked again at the mountains. Then the valley. Then the sky. She was alive. She had chosen life. Chapter 17. The courage to be. The mountains were left behind, and Edelia's steps descended on softer paths, more full of life and the smell of fresh earth. She was no longer a flower. She was no longer a naive child. She was a human. And for the first time since she had received this gift, she felt the full weight of the word. Courage is not always a flame that burns in the chest. Sometimes it's just a spark that flickers in a silent corner of the heart and doesn't go out. That was now in her soul, a small but living flame. She knew that people can be good, but also evil. That love can comfort, but also hurt. That truth can be light or burden. And yet, she had chosen life. Edelia was no longer running. Her walk was no longer that of a lost girl, but of a being who had assumed her fate. Neither the hills nor the forest seemed scary to her anymore. She could smell the wood, the sound of the water, the wind that no longer pushed her from behind, but danced through her hair. At the edge of a dense forest, Edelia stopped. Her gaze fell on an old tree, its trunk cracked by lightning. Although struck, it lived, embraced by ivy, with green branches. There, between its barks shelled, Edelia found a living symbol of her own path. Life did not mean remaining untouched, but continuing, even if you were hurt. That moment, she asked herself a simple but profound question: who am I now? She was no longer just the cornflower on the rock. She was no longer the girl with the astonished eyes of the village, nor the one chased away by people. She was a synthesis of everything. She was what she had chosen to be, a man with a broad heart, with a brave soul, with the visible and invisible wounds of a path she had taken. She remembered 𝕮𝖗's smile, the songs she learned from Mara, the stories told by the old shepherd in the village. Memories that hurt, but which, above all, made her feel alive. She touched her chest, where the trace of the flower was imprinted as a memory of the choice she had made. It was a sign of her past, and an anchor for the future. On her way to the valley, Edelia heard a faint cry. She stopped suddenly. She held her breath and headed towards the sound. Under a fir tree, a child of about 6 years old lay lying, his leg caught in an old iron trap. He was alone, dirty and trembling. Without hesitation, Edelia bent down, trying to untie the rusty mechanism. Her hands bled, but she didn't feel the pain. She only felt the need to save him. After a few minutes of effort and patience, the trap gave way. The boy looked at her with wide, scared eyes. "It doesn't hurt that much," he said through tears. "But I thought no one would come." Edelia took him in her arms and wiped his forehead with the edge of her coat. "I'm here now, and I'm not leaving." Without knowing it, she was doing for him what she would have wanted someone to do for her when she was hurt. That moment, he understood that being human does not mean just suffering, but being able to be for another what you did not have. Being comfort, even when you are full of your own pain. The child's name was Elie, and he lived in a village at the foot of the mountain. He was an orphan, raised by a harsh aunt. His escape had not been an accident, but an escape. Edelia did not tell him that she understood her. But her gaze, warm and gentle, offered Elie something that he had not felt in a long time: safety. She carried him on her back to the edge of a pasture, where a shepherd recognized him and took him to the village. The girl did not stay. She thanked him and went on. Elie shouted a "thank you," with eyes full of longing. The girl smiled at him. It was a beginning, and in the evening, on the edge of a river, she laid her head on a bed of moss. The sky was clear. The stars looked like cornflowers on an infinite blue vault. Her thought flew to Floraea. She imagined the fairy watching her from somewhere, silent, but present. "You were right," thought Edelia. "Life hurts, but it's beautiful." She touched the flower on her chest again. It was there, proof that it is made of light, of deep roots, but also of wings. A flower could not have gone to save a child. A flower would never have understood longing. But she could. She was human. And she did not regret it. She chose to live with the courage to feel everything, from miracle to tear, from fear to love. She promised herself that from now on, anyone who needed a word, a gesture, a presence, he will receive it. Maybe. It won't change the world, but it will change someone's world. And that was enough. Chapter 18. Roots and Wings. Dawn was gently descending over the forests at the foot of the mountain. Drops of dew rested on the leaves, and the wind carried with it the scent of fir and mowed hay. Edelia sat on an old log, her knees drawn to her chest, looking at the horizon. She was silent, but in that silence pulsed life, healing and understanding. Last night she had dreamed of a flower that rose to the sky, with its roots deep in the warm earth, a flower with wings. In her heart, that dream was now sprouting as a conviction. To fly. You must be connected to something to move forward. You must know where you come from. Edelia still carried within her the pain of the village that had driven her away. 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝖑 and her heavy words, the looks of the people who once offered her bread and now turned their backs on her. She had been a flower, then girl, then fugitive. And yet, despite her wounds, she still breathed, she still walked, she still dreamed. And the last few days, Edelia had passed through forests where she had never been. The villages had been left behind. She walked without a destination, but with a purpose. To find peace, to rediscover her meaning. And above all, to free herself from a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying: unforgiveness. For the first time, Edelia began to see beyond the harm that had been done to her. She remembered 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝑑's frowning face, but also her tired eyes, scarred by the worries of a hard life. She remembered how the children listened to her with fear, but also how her little daughter had once brought her a flower. It wasn't pure harm, it was just unspeakable pain, projected onto others. That day Edelia said alone, in the forest, in a hushed but sincere voice, "I forgive you, 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝑑." It wasn't a forgiveness for what she had done, but for what she was carrying within herself, a burden that no longer belonged to her. And with those words, a relief flooded her body like a warm wave. One morning, Edelia returned to the mountain where she had been born as a flower. Not to stay, but to complete the circle. She climbed with determined steps, and the wind seemed to recognize her, swaying her hair like the petals of a sister. She reached the rock where she once grew alone, between sky and stone. where not even the goats climbed. Where the Fairy Floraea had found her. She sat down and closed her eyes. She felt the silence of the mountain again, but now it was no longer a deserted silence. It was a wise silence. She no longer cried from loneliness. Now she cried from gratitude. "Thank you," Edelia whispered. She didn't know who, maybe Floraea, maybe the sky, maybe her own heart that didn't give up. She reached out and she touched a cornflower growing near the edge of the precipice. The touch was not that of a sister, but of a mother. She remembered what she had been, but she knew for sure who she was now. The flower did not speak to her. There was no longer any need. The connection was silent, deep, more felt than understood. There on the rock, Edelia fully accepted her roots. Not just of the body, but of the soul. She was a being born of stone and light, but raised in the pain and beauty of people. When she descended back to the valley, Edelia walked differently. Not just with her steps, but with her whole body. Relieved. Peaceful. She was no longer running away from the world, but heading towards it. She was no longer looking for answers, but was ready to offer. She knew that the road would take her through villages, through rivers, perhaps through other wounded hearts. But she had something she had not had before, wings. Not wings to fly, but to embrace, show love, touch people and destinies. And a small village, on the other side of the mountain, Edelia stopped and asked if she could help pick apples. A woman smiled at her and handed her a basket. She did not ask where she came from. She did not ask who she was. She only saw in the girl's eyes something that resembled the light of the mornings. In every gesture, Edelia now put a part of the wisdom she had acquired. When she rocked a child, she comforted him with the gentleness of the wind that enveloped her on the mountain. When she needed bread, she did it with the patience of the stone that had been a cradle. When she sang, it was as if the entire mountain was singing through her. The days passed, and Edelia became more and more what she had been destined to be, a link between worlds, between nature and people, between silence and words, a soul that had found its roots and spread its wings. One evening, on the shore of a lake, Edelia saw another young woman crying. She didn't say anything to her. She stood next to her in silence. She just handed her a primrose, the last one she had in the little pouch on her chest, where she kept her memories. The girl looked at her and burst into tears again, but those tears were liberating. Sometimes, you don't need words. You just need someone who knows what pain is, and she chose, nevertheless, to stay. Edelia would stay in the world. Not as an ordinary person, but as a being with eyes of light and a heart of the flower. She had learned to forgive. She had learned to move on. And most of all, she had learned to be. Chapter 19. The City. When Edelia first saw the city, it was evening. The sun was setting over the hills, leaving behind a warm orange light, but the city seemed oblivious to 𝕮𝖊𝖃 the valley. The buildings of stone, metal, and glass rose like lifeless trees, undisturbed by birds or wind. The streets were straight and long, like wounds cut into the ground, and from them rose noises, engines, hurried footsteps, shrill voices and sirens wailing in the distance. Edelia looked down, amazed. No birdsong, no rustling of leaves. Everything seemed covered by a dull sound, like a tired heart beating mechanically. She had a few things in her bag, a linen shirt, a small wooden whistle, and the cornflower pressed between the pages of a storybook she had received in a village. Along with these things, she carried with her the pure heart of a being who had been a flower. But was she ready? She walked down to the city with a light step. She had tied her hair with a green ribbon, and her simple dress, made of woven cloth, attracted the eyes of passers-by. Not because she was elegant, but because she was different. People, dressed in dark clothes with gloomy faces, looked at her from the corner of their eyes, without stopping. An old man pushed her without wanting to. Passing by her in a hurry, a woman spoke loudly into a small device, held to her ear. Children walked hurriedly with heavy school bags, and from the shop windows, the illuminated advertisements flashed restlessly. "What place is this?" whispered Edelia. There was no malice, but there was no warmth either. The city seemed like a heart of stone that worked just to work, without feeling. Everything was rushing. Everything was routine. No one seemed to see the sky. Edelia arrived in front of a cafe and sat down on a bench. In front, a man was selling ripe chestnuts. The smell was sweet, bringing back memories. She handed him a small coin, left over from a village, and the old man smiled at her for a moment, surprised. He gave her a warm bag. Are you new here? Yes, she said gently, I came from the mountains. You won't like the city, dear girl, there's no room for dreams here. Only running and smoking. But Edelia doesn't run away from the truth. She listens to him. She eats warm chestnuts and continues to observe. That night, she sleeps under a stone balcony, on a piece of cardboard. In the city, no one asks you where you sleep, but they don't welcome you with an open door either. People are in a hurry. They avoid you or ignore you. Not out of malice, but out of fear, out of fatigue, out of the habit of always walking forward, without looking around. One day, in front of a kindergarten, Edelia saw a small child, with big, sad eyes. He wasn't crying, but he was staring out the window. Edelia took out her wooden whistle and began to sing a forest song, simple, gentle, like a river flowing through stones. The child looked at her, then smiled. When he came to get it, the child said, "Mommy, the fairy sang today." The woman looked confusedly at Edelia, then left, without a word. But the child did not forget, so Edelia began to sing on street corners, between buildings, at the edge of parks. Some ignored her, others left her a coin. But more and more people stopped. An old woman offered her a hot tea. A young poet gave her a book written by him. Child drew her a drawing, a cornflower with wings. One day, a woman approached Edelia. Her eyes were teary and she said to her, "I don't know who you are, girl, but your song reminded me of my mother. I haven't cried in years." "Thank you." Edelia didn't know what to answer. Instead of words, she offered her the pressed cornflower. The woman hugged it to her chest like a treasure. The city remained cold. The traffic continued, the people they were in a hurry, but from time to time, in that sea of indifference, a glimmer would appear, a gentle look, a silent gesture, an outstretched hand. They were souls still alive, still open, still capable of feeling. In the evening, Edelia would write simple words in her notebook. The city has no time. But sometimes, when you sing, people remember. She began to understand, it was not the city that was to blame, but the rush, fear, lack of roots. Here, the wings were cut off by walls and clocks. But Edelia was not here to judge, but to SOW touch, to soften the walls. One day, a teacher said to her, "How about singing to the children at the library? They are tired, sad, but maybe you can bring them light." And so, Edelia entered a library in a grey neighborhood and told a story. The story of a cornflower who wanted to be a girl in order to understand the world. The children listened in silence. Some cried. Others applauded shyly. A boy told her at the end, "I would like to be a flower too sometimes. It seems easier than being human." Edelia smiled at her gently. "Maybe. But a flower can't love the way you do." In the city, Edelia didn't find peace, but she found her purpose. She learned that not all people are cold, but just lost. She learned that love exists even where it seems to have died out, only that it is covered by horns, bills and distrust. The city was not her land. But it was the place where she could bring light. On the edge of a street, in a crack in the sidewalk, a small plant with pale leaves grew. Edelia spotted it and bent down. She offered it a drop of water. People were passing by her in a hurry. But a child stopped, bent down too, and touched the flower with his finger. "Look, Mom. It lives." "Yes. Live." Edelia smiled. And for the first time in the city, you feel that you can flourish there too. Chapter 20. The Children in the Park. The city was grey that morning, with the sky covered with low clouds, and the wind blew between the buildings like a memory of the mountains. Edelia had already gotten used to the bustling streets and hurried steps, but every day she looked for a corner of peace where she could rest her soul. That's how she discovered the park. It was a small place, between large blocks of flats, with cement alleys and a few old benches. On the edge, a few trees had withstood the years, and on a meadow, a few bold flowers had sprouted among the blades of grass. It wasn't her old forest, but it was something alive. And Edelia knew how to feel life in small things. She came there every day, at the same time, late in the morning, when the parents left, and the children began to go out with their grandparents or nannies. At first, she just sat on a bench, softly played the flute or drew in her notebook. The children watched her with curiosity, but they were wary. She didn't look like anyone else around them. Her long hair, tied with a ribbon, her simple dress made of thick cloth, her silent smile, everything about her seemed detached from another world. But children don't stay strangers for long. One day, A little boy with red cheeks approached the bench and asked, shyly, "Are you a fairy?" Edelia smiled broadly. She wasn't laughing at him, but was glad that someone had seen what many grown-ups no longer saw. "Maybe I was Dot, or maybe I just come from a place where mountains whisper and flowers talk." "Really? Do they talk?" "Sometimes, but only with those who listen to them." The little boy thought for a few moments, then sat down next to her. He took a broken-down car out of his pocket and handed it to her. "Can you make her talk too?" Edelia leaned over and whispered, in a playful voice, "Little iron and plastic car, have you ever seen a mountain peak? If so, tell me how the wind sings there." The little boy laughed and said, "She didn't say anything, but I think she liked it." That was the beginning. The next day, she came with a shy little girl by the hand. Then 3 came. Then 5. Within a few days, Edelia had a group of children around her who were eagerly waiting for story time. Every afternoon, the children gathered around her, on the grass or on the benches. Some brought pillows, others biscuits. Edelia told them stories that she had carried in her soul since she was a flower. "Have you heard of the fairy who lives in a cloud and weaves rainbows? Or about the bear who knew poems, but only told them to the little ones? And about the wind that puts mountain children to sleep? Do you know anything? What about the wolves? The wolves in the forests?" Edelia told them everything. She told them about what it was like to feel the sun from a great height, about rocks that seem to cry when it rains, about grasses that laugh when touched, and about the silence that sometimes takes the place of all words. The children didn't want to leave even when evening came. Some fell asleep with their heads in her lap, probably dreaming of mountains and winds and fairies with grass hair. One day, a child asked her, "Do you have parents?" The question fell like a heavy feather in the evening silence. Edelia was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Not in the way you have. But I had a stone mother, who raised me in her shadow, and a flowing water that told me my first songs, and a Fairy Floraea, who gave me a human heart." The children did not laugh. Nor did they seem confused. They understood in their own mysterious way that the story was true even if it seemed magical. And one of them said, "Then we can be yours." From that day on, they called her the fairy on the bench. Once, a little girl came crying. Her mother had called out to her. Edelia took her in her arms and said, "Tears are not weakness. They are the rain of the heart. And without rain, not even flowers grow." Another time, a little boy told her that he felt ugly, that the others laugh at him at school. Edelia took out the pressed cornflower from her notebook and said, "This flower lives only in the wildest places. It is rare and many do not understand it. But those who discover it, keep it forever in their hearts. So are you." The children took root around her. And mysteriously, she took root in their hearts. But not everyone saw the gatherings in the park with good eyes. Some adults murmured, "Who is this girl? Where does she come from? She has no job, no family, no documents. She just sits and tells stories. Our children do not need fairy tales, but real lessons." Edelia smiled at them sadly. She knew that the adult world is often afraid of what it does not understand. But she did not want to convince, only to look alike. From time to time, a curious parent would appear who would sit on the bench and listen. Some would leave smiling, others would just shake their heads. But the children came every day. One evening, the children brought her a gift, a large drawing on a sheet of cardboard, and in the middle, a girl with long hair and a dress made of leaves. Around, mountains, birds, children and flowers, and a big sun that smiled. "You are Edelia," said a little boy. "And so are we. And the world that you make alive with your stories." Edelia felt a lump in her throat. Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. She hugged them all as tightly as she could. "You are the corner flower of the city. Fragile, but brave. Beautiful and rare. Take care of your hearts, because they are magical gardens." And so, in that corner of the park, among the blocks and noise, a realm of dreams blossomed, place where the city stopped being cold, and childhood remembered what it was like to believe. Chapter 21. The Rebirth. The city had begun to feel differently about Edelia. She was no longer just the strange girl in the park, no longer just the fairy with stories, but had become a constant presence, silent but profound, gathering around her a rare peace, a warmth that the hurried world only vaguely remembered. One day, an elderly woman, the principal of a nearby school, came to see her. She had often seen her sitting on the bench, surrounded by children, and had heard from her granddaughter stories about the girl with mountain eyes who knew how to transform every leaf into poetry and every blade of grass into a lesson about life. "Did you learn to do this somewhere?" asked the principal. Edelia smiled. "I didn't learn that, I lived. And the flowers spoke to me. That's how I learned to listen. We need you. Children need something other than theory. Would you like to try? Teach." The word teach seemed difficult, even foreign. Edelia was not a teacher. She did not know how to sit behind a desk or give grades. But she knew something rarer, to sow love in little souls. And maybe that was all a school needed. That's how the rebirth began. The first days were awkward. The classroom was cold, the white walls, the benches lined up like in a hospital of silence. Edelia immediately felt that she had to change everything. Not with rules, but with life. She brought dry twigs, yellow leaves, smooth river stones and pressed flowers. She hung colorful ribbons on the window and replaced the blackboard with a panel on which the children could stick drawings, thoughts, dreams. She told them from the first day, "We will not only learn to write and read, we will learn to feel, to see, to love." Some teachers smiled condescendingly. Others they shook their heads. But the children immediately felt that something was changing. Edelia's lessons were not lessons, but journeys. One day they were learning about the letter F, and talking about butterflies, leaves, happiness and fear. Another day, they were learning to count the pebbles each person brought from the park. Then they were talking about shapes and shadows. It was not a conventional method, but it worked. The children started coming to school earlier to bring flowers, to write short poems, to tell what they had dreamed. The parents were amazed. "What are you doing to them? How come they want to go to school on Saturdays too?" Edelia smiled. She didn't do anything to them. She was just lighting a light in them that was already there. One day, they were learning about the seasons. Edelia took them to the park. "You can't find spring in a notebook," she told them. "You can feel it in the smell and the earth and the buzzing of bees." The children lay down on the grass, closed their eyes and started listening. Some started telling stories. "I hear a swallow. It smells like wet earth. It's warm and green." Then they each wrote a thought. Some drew. Others made up stories about brave leaves and sleepy trees. When they returned to class, each child had a spring in their pocket. Another day they talked about sadness. Not from the textbook, but from their hearts. "Who has ever felt lonely?" Edelia had asked. First there was silence. Then a hand went up. Then another. And another. "I felt lonely when my father left. Me when they wouldn't let me play football with the others. Me when they laughed at my glasses." Edelia told them then. Sadness is not an enemy. It is a rain. It wets us, makes us shrink inside ourselves. But without it, nothing would bloom. They wrote about what hurt them. Then they tore the sheets and put them in a bowl. They poured water over them. They said, "Let go of the pain." Then the next day, they planted seeds in the damp soil, where the pain had dissolved. The news about the flower class spread. Other classes began to visit. Curious teachers asked to observe the lessons. Some laughed to themselves. Others were touched. An old history teacher said, "I have never seen children who listen so much with their hearts. Maybe we should teach less data and more humanity." Edelia was not looking for applause. But every day she felt that her life, even if it wasn't perfect, was becoming more and more meaningful. She was no longer a cornflower on a rock, watching the world from a distance. She was in the middle of it and the middle of people. One day, a little girl came with a small pot, in which a plant was timidly growing. "Look, Edelia. I planted a cornflower. I looked for the seeds with my mother on the internet." Edelia was speechless. She took the pot in her hands as if it were a treasure. She felt the past there, the mountain, the Fairy Floraea, the stone that had grown it. And above all, she felt continuity. That life went on through the love she had given. To the end of the school year, the children prepared a surprise for her on the big board. They wrote, "Edelia is not just our teacher. She is the story we carry in our hearts." They lined up drawings, poems, thoughts written with clumsy, but soulful hands. Edelia felt then, at home. She was no longer alone. She was no longer between two worlds. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. That was her rebirth. Not through magic, but through love. through the courage to remain gentle in a hurried world, through the patience to plant seeds where the earth seemed dry. And even though some still looked at her with suspicion, Edelia knew that true change comes slowly, with deep roots. And in every child who came out of her class smiling, she carried forward a rare, courageous, living marigold. Chapter 22. The Reunion. The city was a sea of noise, lights, and constant movement. The crowded streets, the tall buildings, the speeding cars, all created a world that seemed to never sleep. But amidst all this commotion, Edelia's heart beat with a calm rhythm, focused on her children and the soulful lessons she shared. Her life was now anchored in this new world, but a part of her soul still lived on that mountain where the cornflower had grown. One day, as the sun was preparing to set and the orange color of the sky was reflected in the city's windows, in the cafe where Edelia used to take a break, the door suddenly opened. A young man entered, looking around with eyes that were searching for something or someone. He was tall, with black hair and warm eyes that lit up his face, 𝕮𝖗's eyes. Now a strong and determined young man, with a hint of timid maturity in his gestures. 𝕮𝖗 recognized her immediately, and his heart filled with a joy he hadn't remembered feeling in a long time. He knew he had to find her, to tell her that he had never forgotten her. That she had always been there, in his thoughts, even when life had taken them on different paths. Edelia, sitting with a book in her hand, saw him and flinched. For a moment, she couldn't control her emotions. There were so many unspoken questions, so much expectation and hope mixed in a single look. 𝕮𝖗, she whispered, as if not to ruin the moment. He smiled with that warm sincerity that had conquered her heart a long time ago. Edelia, I searched a lot. I searched for you. They looked at each other for minutes, as if words were useless. The city around them had become just a diffuse background for this meeting of two souls who had found each other. After finding a place at a secluded table, they began to talk about everything that had happened since they had parted ways. 𝕮𝖗 told the story of how the village between the hills had always been on his mind, how the days when they walked together on the paths or listened to the wind through the leaves stirred his soul. Edelia told the story of the city, of the children she taught, of how each day brought her new lessons about life and love, and their words, the pains of the past, the rumors, the tears, the loneliness also shown. But most of all, they felt how every moment spent away from each other had been a preparation for this moment. I thought I would never see you again, 𝕮𝖗 said, with a trembling voice. But I always felt that you were there, somewhere. I felt the same way, Edelia replied, her eyes moistened. But I learned to live, to love even when it hurts. His gaze lit up and without realizing it, 𝕮𝖗 offered her a small flower, a dried cornflower, which he had carefully kept since childhood. For you, he said, to remind you of our mountain, of beginnings and promises. Edelia received the flower with deep emotion, feeling her heart beat faster. It was more than a simple flower. It was a bridge between the past and the present, between two lives that were meeting again to write a new chapter. And the days that followed, 𝕮𝖗 became a constant presence in Edelia's life. Not as a hero from stories, but as a friend, a support, a gentle light in the hectic world of the city. Together they rediscovered the joy of simple things, walks on the riverbank, evenings with stories by the light of the lantern, days when time seemed to stand still. For Edelia, this reunion was proof that life, despite trials, can offer hope again. That love does not die, but only sleeps, waiting for the right moment to flourish. 𝕮𝖗, in turn, understood that true power does not lie in strength, but in the courage to love and be vulnerable. In front of Edelia, he discovered that he could be himself, with all his fears and dreams. Their reunion was not just a moment of nostalgia, but the beginning of a new journey. They began to dream together of a future in which they could bring more light and understanding to the world. Slowly, they learned to heal the wounds of the past and build bridges over the abyss of loneliness. For Edelia, 𝕮𝖗 became an anchor, and for 𝕮𝖗, Edelia was a source of inspiration and courage. The two knew that not everything would be easy, that there would be days with storms and nights with shadows. But that day, under the reddened sky of the city sunset, they promised to face any challenge together. 𝕮𝖗 and Edelia began to get involved together in projects in community, to bring nature closer to the city, to organize walks, workshops for children and adults, to bring back to people's souls the simple joy of flowers and stories. Edelia felt how her life, which often seemed fragile, was reborn again, not like a lonely cornflower on a rock, but like a living flower, blooming in the middle of the world with strong roots and wide open wings. The reunion with 𝕮𝖏 was proof that life, no matter how hard and unpredictable it may be, can always bring beautiful surprises, that in every ending there is a new beginning, and that true magic happens when two lost souls find their way to each other. Chapter 23. The Flower of Life. After so many trials, pains and joys experienced together, Edelia and 𝕮𝖏 decided to return to the mountain of their childhood, that sacred place where it all began, where the first rays of the sun had caressed a lonely cornflower. The mountain was majestic and silent, with its sharp cliffs and wild grass stretching over deep valleys. It was a world where time seemed to stand still and where every blade of grass, every flower petal kept the untold stories of those who lived here. Edelia, now a woman, with a full soul and eyes that reflected all the colors of life, felt her heart beating strongly in her chest the moment they reached the ridge where a cornflower had grown alone. Many years ago, it was as if everything that had happened until then had been just a prelude to this moment of return and reconciliation. 𝕮𝖏, next to her, looked around with a warm wonder. The village between the hills, the dense forests and the fresh air brought back precious memories, but above all, they brought hope to her heart. They were home. Where once the marigold had grown alone, now a young marigold was blooming, vibrant and healthy, like a miracle. She was no longer alone, but surrounded by other plants, butterflies and rays of sunshine that gave her life. She was like a bridge between the past and the present, between the dream of a flower that wanted to become a girl and the real life of a woman who had learned to love and choose. Edelia bent down slightly, touching the fragile petals of the flower, and felt a deep emotion. The symbol of the marigold was not just a natural beauty, but a powerful message about life, love, and choice. "This is the flower of life," she said in a soft voice. "This is where we started, and here we want to start again, with everything we have learned." 𝕮𝖏 smiled, taking Edelia's hand in his. "Life is like this flower, sometimes lonely, but always full of hope, courage and the desire to bloom." On the mountain of her childhood, Edelia looked back at everything she had experienced, the lonely mountain, the village between the hills, the bustling city and the wide world she had known. She felt that each experience had been an essential part of her journey, and now it was time to choose what kind of life she would continue to live. "I chose to be human, to feel and love, even if sometimes it hurts," she said, with warm determination in her voice. "But now I understand that this choice is not just for me, it is for all those who seek the courage to live with an open heart." 𝕮𝖏 looked at her with pride and admiration. "We will bloom together," he said. "Like this flower, we will bring life and hope wherever we go." The sun descended towards the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of pink and orange. Edelia and 𝕮𝖏 began to plant seeds together around the cornflower. They were not just plant seeds, but symbols of hope, forgiveness and rebirth. Edelia knew that her path would not always be easy, that there would be moments of trial and pain, but in her heart a new strength was now blooming, the courage to love life with all its imperfections. And 𝕮𝖏 was by her side, her support, her companion in this endless adventure of life. That evening, under the sky full of stars, Edelia and 𝕮𝖏 made a promise. The promise to protect the beauty of life, to always remember the mountain of their childhood and the cornflower that united them. "We will carry this story with us," said Edelia, with tears of joy in her eyes. The story of a flower that learned to become human and of a heart that chose to love without fear. 𝕮𝖏 took a hand and looked at the stars that seemed to shine only for them. "The flower of life does not bloom only here on the mountain, but in each of us," he concluded. This was the moment of truth, when a lonely cornflower had become a woman with a whole life behind her, when a story of desire, courage and love ended with a flower that symbolized not only beginnings, but also wise choices and the strength to move forward. Edelia and 𝕮𝖏 stayed there for a long time, feeling the cold mountain air, listening to the song of the wind among the fir trees and watching the stars falling like arrows of light. There, in that meaningful silence, they understood that life is a gift that we must cherish and live with all our hearts. Epilogue. Time has passed like quiet water winding through stones, but the story of the girl in the cornflower has remained, not written in books, but carried by the wind that blows through the fir forests and sung by the birds that return to the mountains in spring. Edelia and 𝕮𝖏 did not seek fame or wealth. They lived simply, but beautifully, with a pure soul, on the border between two worlds, one wild and silent, the other full of people. With all their struggles, they carried life forward not as a burden, but as a rare flower, with care, with love and with patience. The children to whom Edelia told stories grew up and learned to see the mountain with different eyes, not as a cold stone, but as a living soul. They learned that the cornflower is not just a rare ornament, but a symbol of the courage to be yourself, even when you are different, of the love that sprouts even in the rock. Edelia never turned into a flower. But the flower remained in her. In the way she smiled, in the gentleness in her eyes, in the peace she brought with her wherever she went. The mountain he did not forget her. Once one summer, on the ridge where there had been only stone and dream, a cornflower bloomed brighter than ever. And around it, others, is said that, on clear nights, whoever climbs there and closes his eyes can hear a gentle whisper, choose to be, choose to love, choose to live. And this is not just a story about a girl born from a flower. It is the story of each of us, when we choose to rise from silence and bloom, even in the most unfriendly places. Because life, like the cornflower, is rare. But it deserves to be lived with all our heart. 𝕮𝖊𝖑𝖏, October 7th, 2025, Birmingham, UK.